Hi, I'm Christopher Rea, and welcome to this brief video introduction to Wu Ming-yi. I recommend that you also take a look at the 3 video lectures I made about Wu Ming-yi's novel, The Man with the Compound Eyes. Wu Ming-yi is a true dynamo. He's an artist, he's an educator, he's a naturalist, and he is someone who brings these multiple types of activity and these multiple interests to bear in his literary works. I highly recommend The Man with the Compound Eyes and The Stolen Bicycle to anyone who's interested in Wu Ming-yi's unique literary vision. In introducing those 2 works, I also want to link them to a broader pattern about ecological writings about Isla Formosa, Taiwan as a beautiful island, that is beautiful partly because of its ecology. There has been a lot of nature writing, you could say, but also works that go beyond nature writing, that are not just about representing what is real, what is the true reality of the flora and fauna of the island, but also try to get humans to imagine themselves as part of that ecology. Wu Ming-yi writes about whales that are the avatars of the souls of drowned men. He writes about trash vortexes, these islands of garbage that are floating across the ocean. And he writes about migrating butterflies. I would identify butterflies as perhaps the most important motif that runs throughout Wu Ming-yi's writings. This is a motif tied to ecological fragility, beauty, precision, like the craft of storytelling and the craft of illustration. Butterflies are also a literary motif that I think connect Wu Ming-yi's writings to the writings of Vladimir Nabokov, as well as to the philosopher Zhuangzi. Wu Ming-yi grew up in Taipei, and he began his career as a writer in the 1990s, and he's garnered many literary awards, both domestic and international, for his novels, short stories, and his essays. He is a conservationist and a naturalist who really wears his heart on his sleeve in many of his writings. He's also an educator who for many years has been a professor in eastern Taiwan. He also illustrates many of his own books, and as you'll see, he is an artist of no mean talent. He has been writing since the 1990s, but many of his early works are still not available in English translation, although I'm sure that some will be in the future. His books are often multimedia, including not just written words, but also diagrams and drawings and photographs. The title of this collection, So Much Water, So Close to Home, resonates with Wu Ming-yi's more famous work, The Man with the Compound Eyes, in which we have 2 characters who build a seaside house that is eventually inundated by the sea and becomes the sea house. But Wu Ming-yi brings to his novel this sense of personal investment, and that he has actually gone out into the forests, into the mountains. He has observed the flora and fauna. He has gone on the boat with these travelers and written about their experience. He also weaves together experiences from his childhood and adds a kind of mystical layer, a supernatural layer, a sci-fi layer to this experience, where remarkable, sublime things happen in these ordinary spaces. The Illusionist on the Skywalk has been adapted for television. There's a series called The Magician on the Skywalk, which is said to be released soon on Netflix. Wu Ming-yi's international breakout novel is The Man with the Compound Eyes. This is a novel about an ecological catastrophe that affects everyone. A trash vortex, an enormous floating island of garbage, is about to smash into the coast of Taiwan, and it carries on one of its fragments a man who has been exiled from his small island of Wayo. This indigenous second son who has been exiled like all other second sons from this small place that can only support so many people, expected to drown in the ocean, but instead he found himself on this unlikely, incomprehensible island, which carries him as a vehicle all the way to another island, the island of Taiwan. And this novel shows us the island of Taiwan as being within the midst of this vortex through compound vision of many different characters, some of whom are coping with loss, the loss of their homeland, or the loss of loved ones. And deep within the forest, which some characters call home and where other characters have disappeared, there is a man with the compound eyes, this mysterious figure who seems somewhat human, but also non-human, who has a superhuman type of vision. And in those compound eyes, human beings in crisis see visions of a broader ecology in all its myriad variety, as if projected onto innumerable little screens. This is a novel that asks us to break out of our own tunnel vision, to look beyond our particular place, beyond Taiwan, even beyond humanity itself. So we have an international cast, and many of these characters ultimately discover that to focus on the human is not enough. We need to see with compound vision how the entire ecology fits together. The Man with the Compound Eyes has been translated into multiple languages. It has also recently been adapted for the stage by a German director. This is a novel that has received high acclaim, including from leading practitioners of speculative fiction. Ursula K. Le Guin wrote that we haven't read anything like this novel, ever. She talks about how South America gave us magical realism, and Wu Ming-yi gives us something else entirely. Le Guin is famous in part for the books of Earthsea, a series that she wrote since the 1960s, a world full of islands and populated by non-industrial peoples, magical societies, and by dragons who, with the good wizards, help to maintain the ecological balance of this very fragile place. This is also a place that faces peril from bad wizardry and human actions that can upset that balance. Another important work of Le Guin's that I would mention here is The Word for World is Forest. This is another type of ecological parable that has very strong overtones of opposition to the Vietnam War, which was going on at the time. In this novel, we have a forest planet that has been turned into a logging colony by a military power that is enslaving and raping the inhabitants, who are all peaceful indigenous people. Ultimately, these little green men do rise up in a successful revolt and drive the colonists off, but in the process, they commit mass violence, something new to their culture. And so there's a sense that a victory has been won at terrible cost. The Stolen Bicycle is another wonderful novel, which uses the bicycle as a vehicle for many different types of stories. This is another work that has been illustrated by the author himself and weaves in many stories from Wu Ming-yi's own personal background, like the memory of an elephant at the Taipei Zoo. Wu is an avid collector and restorer of vintage bicycles. And some of the stories we find in this novel are the history of an industry and the history of a way of life. When Taiwan was really a bicycle economy, you had bicycles imported from Japan, you also had a domestic bicycle industry, and Taiwan is still a world leader in producing bicycles. Back in the day, however, you also had models that had, say, a double crossbar so that the bicycle can bear extra weight. For example, if you're taking crops from the field to market. The novel also contains the story of a stolen bicycle that alludes partly to and is inspired by this Italian neorealist film, in which we have a man who depends on the bicycle for his livelihood, this new job. But his bicycle is stolen. He goes all around the city looking for it. And so it is really this quest to retrieve what has been stolen that drives a lot of the narrative. And there's also a moment at the end when he has to decide, should he take this opportunity to steal someone else's bicycle? In Wu Ming-yi's novel, a bicycle is stolen with tremendous consequences for one family. But this is not just a family story, nor is the bicycle just a mode of transportation for people bringing their crops to market. The bicycle is also an instrument and a vehicle of war, and it is one that had a particularly important historical role in Japan's invasion of Southeast Asia. Taiwan, of course, was a colony from 1895 to 1945. The stolen bicycle takes us into the forests of northern Burma, where the Japanese are trying to do jungle warfare and lightning raids using these bicycles. These tropical jungles, just like the Borneo forests in Zhang Guixing's fiction, are also home to elephants. The Stolen Bicycle was nominated for a major international literary award, and Booker Prize staff sparked an international controversy when, without consulting the author, they changed his nationality from Taiwan to Taiwan, China, bowing to pressure from the People's Republic of China's government. And following a protest from the author and an international outcry, they fortunately changed it back. Wu Ming-yi has more recently published a collection of stories called The Land of Little Rain. Rain is another important motif in Wu Ming-yi's story. The Man with the Compound Eyes, for example, has an indigenous member of the Ponca tribe of Taiwan singing Bob Dylan's song about a hard rain. This particular collection takes its title from a 1903 collection of essays about the American Southwest. Within the book, Wu Ming-yi includes his illustrations of different flora and fauna. Wu Ming-yi's drawings are not just of nature, but also of human-created environments, like this large structure in Taiwan that was once a symbol of modernity, a place where Wu Ming-yi himself grew up with his many siblings and his parents, who ran a shop there, but has now been torn down. So Wu Ming-yi represents, both in his literature and his art, places and things that have disappeared, that might disappear in exquisite detail. Butterflies flit and migrate through Wu Ming-yi's fiction and his nonfiction alike. One collection of his nonfiction writings is called The Book of Lost Butterflies, Media Zhi, which could refer to butterflies that have lost their way. It could refer to the loss of butterflies from a place like Taiwan. It could also refer to someone being lost amidst butterflies, or being kind of enraptured by nature. The Tao of Butterflies, or Die Dao, is another work by Wu Ming-yi that includes both illustrations of butterflies as well as nonfiction writings. It's possible to write about and draw butterflies in Taiwan because the island has so many butterflies. These butterflies have long been recognized as one of the island's natural treasures. But Wu Ming-yi wants to understand butterflies as more than just exquisite, beautiful objects. Taiwan is a place that is not just home to indigenous butterflies, but is also a way station for butterflies traveling to and from elsewhere. So a much larger butterfly ecosystem, you could say, relies on Taiwan. Butterflies are a motif that run throughout Wu Ming-yi's fictional and non-fictional works. And Wu Ming-yi treats butterflies individually and in groups as having multiple types of symbolisms. Yes, they symbolize beauty, but more than just that. They also represent a type of vulnerability of both individual life forms and of entire ecosystems. They are mobile, they are always on the go. They can travel vast distances despite their small size. They are also very transient. The life of a butterfly is not very long. But if you want to represent a butterfly, for example, in a sketch, you have to do so with remarkable precision. Butterflies see things, and they also seem to have eyes on their wings, these false eyes to fool predators. And I would regard butterflies in particular as representing a type of connectedness, in that they connect together different places as part of a larger ecosystem. The Man with the Compound Eyes carries an epigraph from the poet W.B. Yeats: "Wing above wing, flame above flame." And I would speculate that some of those wings are butterfly wings. At one point in The Man with the Compound Eyes, a character mentions Vladimir Nabokov, a famous writer and also an avid lepidopterist. Throughout his life, and particularly his decades in North America, Nabokov didn't just write, he was also constantly following butterflies. He would drive thousands of miles following these migrating butterflies. He was a self-taught expert in butterflies, having no professional training, but through acute observation, through his sketches, through his examination of their genitalia, he had some remarkable discoveries. For example, one of Nabokov's discoveries was that there was a particular species of North American butterfly that had actually migrated from Asia, and many scientific experts dismissed his theory, but it was later proven to be true. The Man with the Compound Eyes is also a novel with many long-distance travelers, both human and non-human, and the appearance of butterflies within this novel to me is also linked to this motif of compound eyes, where it's almost like the individual butterflies are the individual ommatidia within the compound eye. The novel The Stolen Bicycle also includes one plot line that follows people who make their living harvesting butterflies and creating these artworks from dead butterflies who've had their wings torn off. At the beginning of the novel, there's a timeline of 100 years in Taipei. 1970, overharvesting and habitat destruction send the butterfly handcrafts industry into decline. The Stolen Bicycle contains multiple scenes in which we can see Wu Ming-yi being, like Nabokov, very attentive to the precision of observation and expression. For example, in this scene, we have a character who is creating these butterfly handicrafts and is arranging all of the wings of the dead butterflies into a pattern that makes it look like a starry sky. Mi Die Zhi, or the Book of Lost Butterflies, also calls to mind another type of butterfly befuddlement. This is perhaps the most famous dream in the Chinese literary tradition, Zhuangzi's butterfly dream, in which this philosopher falls asleep and he dreams that he's a butterfly flitting around happily. Then when he wakes up and finds that he's human, he's not sure. Was he Zhuangzi dreaming of being a butterfly, or is he now a butterfly dreaming of being Zhuangzi? This type of uncertainty about what is real and what is unreal, what is fiction and what is reality, to me carries through many of Wu Ming-yi's works: The Magician on the Skywalk, The Man with the Compound Eyes. One of the things that Wu Ming-yi is doing is engaging in a type of eco-literature, or ecologically minded literature, which has become very prominent in 21st century Taiwan. This is partly because Taiwan has a remarkable natural environment, including not just 300 species of butterfly, but also the highest peaks in East Asia east of the Himalayas. You have active hiking clubs that will go into the jungles and the forests and up the mountains. There's a whole industry of people who will lead you on tours, some run by indigenous peoples. And I would single out Liu Kexiang as a pioneer of this type of ecologically minded writing in both fiction and nonfiction. Liu himself focuses on nonfiction and on educational works, where he has actually gone onto the trails and he has observed the flora and fauna, and he reports about his personal experience, where over his multiple works we get this composite picture of a very fragile ecosystem. Indigenous voices, like those of the Paiwan writer Aronglong Sakinu, also talk about the relationship between humans and nature, both in the past and in the threatened present. Badai is another indigenous writer of the Puyuma people, who has written about Taiwan's ecosystems in both realist and in fantastical modes. We also have visitors from abroad with a Taiwan connection who have come to the island, swum in the lakes, hiked on the trails, and try to represent what is remarkable and unique about this treasure island of nature. So one very common realist imperative in mainland China has been to get close to the people in order to represent them correctly. I find a similar type of imperative in these writers of and in nature, and that you really have to get into nature. You have to get close to things in order to represent them accurately. And this extends to Wu Ming-yi himself, who goes out frog hunting and bird watching and butterfly collecting. I expect that we'll be seeing many more of Wu Ming-yi's works translated in the future, but for now I would recommend these ones. I would recommend the 2 novels of his that are available in English translation by Daryl Stirk. We can also look forward to the television adaptation of The Magician on the Skywalk when it is released internationally. There also exists an online archive of the various public lectures that Wu Ming-yi has given, particularly about writing. These include talks in scholarly venues such as at Cambridge University or at UCLA, as well as on the international circuit of writers' festivals and book fairs. But now let's move on to The Man with the Compound Eyes.